So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is who are we talking about when we say Macassans? And you can see it's labelled there at the bottom of South Sulawesi there. But it's important to note that Makassar is a Malay word, not a Macassan word. And so it's a word we use to describe speakers of the Macassanese language group who live in that area. But the people we're talking about would have thought of themselves as residents of the twin kingdoms of Goa and Telok, with Goa being the larger of the two kingdoms. They were considered locally as one people with two leaders. Goa was the larger of the two kingdoms, and so much of the trade was auspiced by them. But I guess one of the things I really wanted to talk about today was why the Macassans went all of that way. You can see it's not a short trip, and you can see from the sort of arrows of the trade winds that actually sort of says it takes a year to go there because of the way the trade winds work. You have to stay for 6 months once you're there because you can't get back. So this is not an easy journey to make by any means. And as a result, trepang fishing was not a traditional trade item of the Macassans. They were originally spice traders, and they dominated the whole spice trade in the region, which, as we know, trading through Malacca and into Europe was worth a fortune. When the Dutch arrived in the mid-17th century, they basically, after a long series of wars with the Macassans were very strong and powerful. They fought hard. The Dutch eventually took over the spice trade, and that left the Macassans essentially looking for new places and people to trade with. So what did they do? They turned north. They looked to China, and they could no longer go to Malacca and Batavia because the Dutch were sort of controlling that. So they looked north to China, and instead of trading spices, they traded birds' nests and shark fin, which they got mostly from the coast of Borneo, and trepang, which they also got from Borneo and from Australia. So that's really how the Macassans ended up there. So that's why we start to see them arriving in large numbers in the sort of late 17th century. Here's what they're arriving in. These are their prows. And I guess one of the things I kind of wanted to point out here is this is a lovely picture, and it's, there's two little boats here. It was not two boats. It was a massive fleet, possibly hundreds of boats with thousands of people who, because of the trade winds, arrived and stayed for 6 months. So there's a really big logistical issue about having that many people arrive on your shore. And the Macassans, historically were very powerful. So, for example, when the people on the island of Bima decided in the early 1600s to break their vassal state relationship with Macassar and trade instead with the Dutch, the Macassans descended on their port with 400 war vessels. That's a big fleet, And so I guess I just kind of wanted to point out that this was mass production on a mass scale, especially at the time. This was not a few little fishermen arriving on the coast. This was a lot of people. Should we move on to the next slide?
And a massive cultural impact, as we'll see, on the
exactly.
peoples of the North Coast. And I think when Matthew Flinders encountered a fleet, it was 60 boats and 1,000 crew. That's the size of it. But anyway, moving on.
So even today, that many people arriving suddenly on the shores of Arnhem Land, it's that would be a massive deal. It's huge. Here is a very attractive photo of the trepang, which is what they were harvesting. And I guess the main thing I wanted to point out about this is that this is not a product that Macassans actually used. As we said, this was a Chinese product. They were only really farming it or harvesting it to supply the Chinese for Chinese medicine. So this was not a local delicacy by any means. Next one. Okay, so this is a list of a lot of the kind of words that have been sort of loan words from various languages in the Malay world. We have
the Yolŋu languages, yeah.
This is in Yolŋu language. So the musicians in the room might be familiar with in the sort of second dot point juling, suling, it would be in Indonesian, flute. So some of those are, current Indonesian or at that point Malay words. We also have Makassarese and Bugis words, the Bugis being the other people who lived nearby in South Sulawesi. The one that really interests me, though, there is Lilipa, the canoe, because that, I think, points towards an even earlier phase of contact. That's a Sama-Bajau word, and I think it's also used by some of the other sea people around Borneo. So to me, that looks, I suspect that would probably actually predate Macassan contact. There's, Macassans weren't the first to arrive, which isn't surprising given the numbers they arrived in. It's.
And Nganachi, which is a Yolŋu word used for alcohol today, is a Yolŋuization of Arak.
Which again is well known throughout the Malay world as a rice wine.
And Damburu, drum.
Drum, yep.
Oh, and of course, the Yolŋu money, the Yolŋu word for money is
Rupiah.
Rupiah. Yeah. And the Yolŋu word for non-Yolŋu, for white people generically?
Oh, Balanda.
Balanda, which is the Malay word for Dutch.
Or a Hollander.
Hollander, yes, exactly. That's where it comes from. Hollander. Yeah, that's where it was originally. So English, Hollander, Malay, Indonesian, Balanda, and then Yolŋu, Hollander.
And there's another very important loan word that we discussed at great length about discussing, which is this one, Anthea.
Walata. Yeah. So Macassans that arrived, they were Islamic, part of a wide range group of Islamic states in Malaysia. And on their ships, they had imams. Every ship had an imam who would lead the call to prayer, which would have been heard from the beach. But also the imams were not just there as religious leaders, they were also there as sort of lawyers, peacekeepers, I guess. When there were disputes, they would come in and make sure people were treated equally and fairly. So if individuals in the fleet transgressed against local law, which in a fleet that size is probably bound to happen at some point, it would have been the imams probably who would have come in and helped to negotiate how to deal with that. So the imams would have been an important part but not just in the religious activities on the ship, but also in the negotiating with people on the land and people whose waters they were in. Did you want to say more about that, Brian?
Yes, you're right there. There were like peacekeepers, landlords, and they look after our nature as well. Make sure nobody does harm to the land or to break branches or dig hole or do like man-made thing, no, like they have to be look after and be peaceful to and harmony to the land, holy land. So yeah, like Walata and Urate like my ancestor, same as like Walata. Look after my area. If I do wrong thing, I get punished or I get told by my old people. These are the laws of this Walata or Urate. You can't do this and that. You can do this, but you can't do that. You can get a fish, just a little bit of fish, but you after that you don't throw the bones. Like you have to make a one hole to contain them there. So that next time you come for that hunting, you'd still get more feed by the land and sea. Yeah. These are the laws for Olata and Oratalaku. You don't get a lot of fish and then throw bones everywhere, no? No, you can't. Our custom is to contain in one howl. Keep it, even for Doa Moioti and for Yirija Moioti, they have the same sort of a common protocols or law, you know. Yeah.
So sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
So something's just occurred to me that I should have worked out years ago. So the imams on these vessels were the important intermediaries who went to the Yolŋu leaders and said, well, we actually do have law and we will respect your law and we will be the go-betweens to make sure that, you know, we can actually get along.
Yes.
And of course, with about 150 years of continuous contact, Yolŋu certainly knew that these so-called Macassan visitors had a god and a set of laws that they themselves recognized, which comes across linguistically into Yolŋu Mata as Walata Walata.